Good evening, my friends. This is the Grim Flayer. I hope you're doing very well tonight. More spoilers to come. I didn't think I'd be covering this many cards, but it's kind of exciting. None of them seem totally busted, but a lot of them seem like they've got real potential, and we're covering a duo of Orzhov cards here, and the question is, are they dead? AKA, will they fit into Deadguy or perhaps Abzan Midrange? And because they could go in Abzan, I thought about calling this Will It Rock, but hey, we gotta float some new titles, so Fracture and Vanishing versed, a pair of instants, similar, or indeed identical costs. Are they dead? We're going to find out here. So thank you so much, as always, for watching. Let's take a look at our new interactive options. Let's do the more straightforward, easier to analyze, easier to process one first. Fracture for 1 white. In 1 black, we have an instant that is a Disenchant Plus style effect, of which there are many. This one is actually pretty darn good, though. It reads destroy target artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker, so it's a literal disenchant. That can hit planeswalkers too. It is, of course, a little bit hard to cast. If you are not in black, you cannot cast it. If you are playing colorless utility lands in a 2-color deck, you might sometimes fall shy of being able to cast it. So not strictly better due to a more extreme casting cost. However, this is a major upgrade. Being able to hit a planeswalker for 2 mana with no downsides is actually extraordinarily rare. And the fact that it does other things as well, often when I have played Abzan or Deadguy variants lately, I have found myself reaching for multiple Disenchant Plus effects in the sideboard. When you don't have green especially, and therefore you lack Assassin's Trophy, Abrupt Decay, Maelstrom Pulse, etc., you will often need these cards to fill in your gaps as far as what your main deck interactive spells can hit, and Fracture most certainly does that. Now, Fracture is the exact sort of printing that makes me happy. It's obviously not busted. It's good, flexible, unique interaction that kind of fills a niche that hasn't already been filled. The more of those cards we can have, the better a deck builder will be rewarded for techie one-ofs, for a vast and well-organized maybe board, right? But part of me is sad that good old Disenchant is basically now completely unplayable, at least in black, white X mid-range decks, right? Because Disenchant is such an iconic card. It's so cool. This is my favorite printing that you're seeing right here, but there are so many cool printings. Disenchant has cool printing after cool printing. I love this full art as well, but if I only had to run one, it would be the OG printing. But we're taking a look at some other Disenchant Plus effects, ones that I have run recently, just for full comparison with Fracture, and if you notice a trend among the others, they all exile. Celestial Purge is very trendy right now because black and red, very common. Of course, some decks play both, but often decks that are playing creatures will play either one or the other. Therefore, Celestial Purge live more often than not against opposing creature decks. Now we'll switch over to the cool full art printing, but I wanted to give you a chance to read it in case you weren't familiar. We also have Revoke Existence, which is disenchant, but it exiles, and right now, with Heliod in the meta, with Klothys in the meta, with Wormcoil Engine and ever-present in Tron, there are enough incentives to exile opposing threats rather than to destroy them, especially if you're on Deadguy. If you're on Abzan, it gets more complicated because sometimes you'll want to put their things in the yard to grow the Tarmogoyf, especially these unusual types. But overall, I think Revoke Existence right now better than Disenchant, so therefore we need to circle back to Fracture and say, is it better still? Because the exile is more desirable on one hand, but Fracture can hit planeswalkers as well. That's what you, the deck builder, will have to decide. Finally, another example is a more narrow but also very relevant effect in the form of Deicide. It's an exile target enchantment, but if it happens to be a god, you have an extraction effect essentially as well. So Fracture with some stiff competition, because again, right now, Exile is at a premium, Destroy not quite so much, especially because so many of your other cards already do that. Nevertheless, this card is dead, this card will rock, this card is absolutely 100% playable, and should be a part of our maybe boards. The fact that it is flexing into the anti-planeswalker role for only 2 mana, while also covering your disenchant base is huge. Definitely want to pick up some copies of this this, definitely want to add it to your maybe board, and definitely want to keep it in mind while brewing. Fracture gets 2 thumbs up from me. Our second card to cover is also dead, my friends. This card will also see play in Deadguy, Abzan, similar decks, maybe Mardu we can include here. Sorry, Mardu fans, I know I have a lot of you on the channel. I should be more considerate of the Mardu fans. It's just not the first one that pops into my mind because it has been out of the meta for a while, but making a comeback now. Anyway, Vanishing Verse, 1 white, 1 black, instant, exile, target, mono-colored, permanent. Those are 4 very powerful words. I guess 5 powerful words if we include instant, which is great. But okay, so we love 2 mana only. We love instant. We love exile. Target, yeah, okay, these things happen. Veil of Summer still blows us out, but let's not think about that right now. Monocolored. Okay, that does restrict things a little bit, and to the extent that this is restrictive, that is the cap on this card, right? If this was just exile, target, permanent, obviously this would be a nailed-on 4 of. Monocolored permanent, yeah, we're going to need to figure out exactly what this is going to hit, what it's going to miss, that's where the analysis comes in. But permanent! Permanent! Note that it doesn't say non-land permanent. Lands don't have a color, right? So that is kind of implicit there. Note also that colorless permanents do not have a color, so this is not hitting your Tron payoffs. It is not hitting artifacts. So it is not quite as wide-ranging as it might look at first glance, but we are still tagging almost everything. We're hitting creatures. We're hitting enchantments. We don't care if they're indestructible because we're exiling them. It is incredible. This is a really, really powerful card. We're, of course, also hitting Planeswalkers, too, a lot of the time, assuming they are not multicolored. So this card is absolutely awesome. I think it is in the vein of Abrupt Decay, in that it is that powerful, roughly. They do very different things, but I'm right now putting them in a similar vein, because Vanishing Verse and Abrupt Decay are both cards that can definitely whiff at some inopportune times, but definitely are very powerful 2-mana, instant speed, interactive effects. Maybe Vanishing Verse a little more restricted overall than Abrupt Decay, but it exiles, and again, right now at least, exiling at such a premium. I think Vanishing Verse might be similarly positioned to Abrupt Decay in terms of it being at least a 1-of in basically any kind of interactive deck that wants it, rising up to 2 some of the time. In extreme cases, you maybe want 3 in your 75. So I'm kind of thinking of that right out of the gates without having looked at any of the meta lists right yet to see exactly what this hits and what it whiffs on. Let's do that right now together. We're going to start at the top and work our way down, my friends. So what's the top deck in the meta? That's right, it is Heliod Company, nemesis of Midrange. Who is the namesake and centerpiece card of Heliod Company? That would be Heliod. Heliod Suncrown, to be exact. And what card trades with Heliod cleanly and at a tempo win? That is Vanishing Verse. That's right, we're exiling the indestructible, monocolored permanent, and gaining a little bit of tempo while doing so, able to do it at instant speed even if they find him off of Collected Company. That in and of itself is big, big news, my friends. But if you look at the rest of this list, it is tagging everything besides Conclave Mentor and Walking Ballista. We get to tag Arbor Elf, Noble Hierarch, Auric Champion, a hard card to remove, Ranger Captain, Skyclave Apparition, Spike Feeder, even good old Utopia Sprawl, a good way to slow them down on the play. Number 2 in the format on Goldfish is Amulet Titan, and look at all these beautiful monocolored permanents we hate to see. Arboreal Grazer, Azusa, Dryad, Primeval Titan, all of them monocolored, all of them subject to exile, right? Unfortunately, we cannot hit Amulet of Vigor, and it would be a realistic use case, of course, for this card to hit Amulet of Vigor. It is a realistic use case of Fracture, for example, and of other Disenchant Plus cards. So this, and it's also, to be fair, a use case for Abrupt Decay, which we have already compared, what's it called again? Something Verse, I've already forgotten. Vanishing Verse. We've already compared Vanishing Verse to Abrupt Decay. Admittedly, not hitting Amulet is big game, and that is why this is not just a face roll for of, right? I think it is a role player in the vein of Abrupt Decay, although covering different bases. But even though, one-for-oneing permanents against this deck after they've hit the field is not usually a winning strategy, ultimately you have other ways to get there in matchups like this, and these cards can still be really, really relevant, can play a very strong role. Unlike Fatal Push, it's going to hit every creature. Unlike Path to Exile, we're not ramping them. Unlike Abrupt Decay, it's going to hit high-costed stuff. The list goes on. Number 3 is an awesome deck, Jund Death Shadow, so much cooler than the top two, am I right? But Jund Death Shadow gets wrecked by Vanishing Verse 2. Every single one of their 18 main deck threats gets traded with and gets exiled. The only card that is kind of sort of in their main deck that you can't hit is Lurrus of the Dream Den, but you're even hamstringing Lurrus a bit when you exile cards instead of destroying them. One less thing for Lurrus to try to buy back, right? Now in the sideboard, I'm sure sometimes in main decks you will see Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger, and big old Kroxa not to be stopped by Vanishing Verse. Kroxa not much for poetry. We can deduce that much, but nevertheless, Vanishing Verse, a total slam dunk, awesome card against a powerful deck in the form of Jund Shadow. Against Izzet Blitz, we do unfortunately miss out on the very powerful Sprite Dragon, but if you're playing a Deadguy list or a Abzan list, this is going to die to your pushes, this is going to die to your decays, it's going to die to everything else, so it's still definitely going to be great to bring in Vanishing Verse because you hit everything else. Swifty, Soulscar, Stormwing Entity, a much harder card to kill, as it in fact is this one of Bedlam Reveler, than the smaller stuff, and you can hit Entity and Reveler. Granted, they will have gotten their ETBs, but sometimes you still need to kind of clean up the mess after the big boys hit the field, and you can even get rid of Blood Moon or Brazen Borrower sometimes post-side with the card. I'm telling you guys, it's going to wax and wane in the meta, but right now in this meta, and in most metas I dare say, it's going to hit a whole lot. And next up is Tron, where admittedly this card is terrible. It can hit Thragtusk, and that's cool, not much else, This list happens to be main decking Thrags. We also have, of course, Thragtusk will come in from the side if it's not already in the main against mid-range decks. That said, it's still not worth having this in just to try to answer Thragtusk. That's not even a great use case. Thragtusk having an enters the battlefield and a leaves the battlefield trigger, definitely very resilient to removal, but that's not a reason to bail on this card because you should consider it spot removal by and large. And spot removal, not very good against Tron in general, just as a class of card versus a certain archetype, right? Number 6 is Burn, and we're hitting every single permanent in Burn. We are hitting Goblin Guide, Swifty, Eidolon of the Great Revel, Core Firewalker, even if they side in Rest in Peace against your BGX or BW deck, you can hit that too. This card is going to exile them, which might be, again, a little bit worse for the purposes of Tarmogoyf, especially in this matchup. We're not giving Skoos any food, we're not growing the Goyf, definitely worth mentioning, but overall, and if the Burn player happens to be on Lurrus, that can work to your advantage too, although that's not very common any longer. Overall, though, it's 2 mana, it's instant speed, it's good removal, it's hitting all the major stuff. Definitely a nice one here, too. Number 7 in the meta is Death and Taxes, mono white. I actually didn't know this, and that's just another great deck for Vanishing Verse to shine against because they are a creature go wide deck, try to kill you with a lot of small stuff. Spot removal absolutely shines there. It is cheap, which is important against Thalia, against Leonin Arbiter, similar. And we also have instant speed, which is relevant against Ether Vial. Kind of like with Amulet of Vigor, this is a very important 1-drop artifact that sadly cannot be hit. But we are, in some ways, happy, some of the time at least, to ignore Ether Vial because that's not gas, it's not action, it's kind of ramp, and it's kind of a trick, right? It gives things flash, basically. So we are absolutely able to ignore that some of the time if we have enough removal, especially instant speed removal, to keep the board clear while we win the game or take over the game, and that is what we can do with the help of Vanishing Verse, because again, it's going to hit every single creature. It can even hit, I guess, Maul of the Skyclaves, although in general it's going to miss out on the equipment as well. Number 8 in the meta is Jund, where Vanishing Verse is a bit of a mixed bag. You're able to tag Scavenging Ooze, Tarmogoyf, Seasoned Pyromancer, especially Spyro not a very good target. The other two pretty much must removes and good removal targets in general. You're also able to flex into answering a Liliana of the Veil, which is actually really relevant. So we've got some good targets here. If you see other cards in there that are not in this list, like Dark Confidant, it can hit some of those too. But if you note, we are missing out once again on Kroxa, just like in the Shadow list, but also in Jund. Crucially, we miss Bloodbraid Elf and Ren in 6. Now, granted, it's not maybe the very best to point removal at these types of cards because they already will have gotten value by the time you do. Nevertheless, you are, against Jund, they can pick your hand apart, they can run you out of resources. It is a little sketchy to have a card that doesn't hit all that much, right? In terms of, half the time, the threat they have when the dust is settled will not be answered by Vanishing Verse. So it's kind of, I think, a coin flip as to exactly how good this will be. Probably more dependent on your 75 is the BWX player, and to a lesser extent on what exactly you see from the Jund player than anything else. Vanishing Verse doing even less for us against Blue-White Control, which is the number 8 meta deck. We are able to hit a Snapcaster Mage, a Vendilion Click, Jace the Mind Sculptor, that's probably the most appealing target overall, and then your occasional second click, Narset, stuff like that from the side. But in general, the spot removal game, kind of like against Tron, not really going to get you there against Blue-White Control, and it does really hurt that we cannot hit Teferi either version, any version, unless they play the mono-blue flash creature Teferi, which, then good luck to you. Pretty cool card, and one that loses to Vanishing Verse pretty hard, though, I guess. Anyway, we definitely have better things to do than try to play the spot removal game, but with a normal Deadguy or Abzan strategy, Vanishing Verse may still be better than bad cards in your 60 post side. You've got to get those fatal pushes out of there to start. Your path to exiles have to go too. So, Vanishing Verse, even though this is far from its ideal matchup, might still actually be better than some other core mid-range cards. I think I just said Control was 8th, it was 9th, and Eldrazi Tron, sadly, is 10th, which we end on a sour note here. I'm not going to go below the 10th spot. You guys get the picture. You can do the rest on your own if you want to go a little bit deeper in the meta, but obviously Vanishing Verse, a sadly dead card here, and not in the good way, not in the is it dead way I asked at the beginning of the video, but more in the traditional, oh, this card is dead. It doesn't really do anything at all. Well, there you go, guys. I think Vanishing Verse went, for the first half of that meta or so, and probably for the majority overall, it looked like an absolute all-star, but we did see enough subpar, or in fact completely dead use cases where I think, again, just like I said at the beginning, just like my first impression was, we should kind of conceive of it like an Abrupt Decay. Not that it replaces Decay, they do different things, but that they are similarly pretty easy to always leave home with one in decks that want this effect and can support it and want to play an attrition strategy. And it's definitely reasonable to play 2 a lot of the time, and if it's really, really well positioned, you could probably go up to 3. I don't really see this as a 0 of, and I don't really see this as a 4 of, and 1 through 3 will wax and wane based on the meta. Worth noting also, to bring things full circle, when we look again at Fracture, this is a destroy effect. It's very good. I think it's a good role player, a good maybe board card, often a good sideboard card, but it does not exile. However, Vanishing Verse does exile. So if we think Vanishing Verse can in some way cover our bases against the aforementioned cards where we'd want Revoke Existence or something against instead of Fracture, then maybe Fracture stock arises alongside Verse. In other words, if you register Verse, you are more able to register Fracture alongside it. Between that and everything else I've said here, these are actually 2 low-key, exciting printings for Deadguy Ale, for Abzan, for Mardu, and for mid-range in general. Definitely some pretty cool ones I expect them to see play in the Esper Control deck that is doing well right now as well, especially Vanishing Verse. So there you go, my friends. Those are my thoughts on these 2 cards. Let me know, as always, what you think below. Thanks for watching all my spoiler coverage. It is pretty fun to make it, and we'll do some more, I'm sure, before Strixhaven is all said and done. See you then.